Log Horizon Volume 1, Chapter 1, Catastrophe, Part 1. Name, Shiroe. Level 90. Race, Half-Alv. Class, Enchanter. HP, 8,303. MP, 12,088. Equipment. Prudent Horned Owl Cane. A cane containing the holy protection of the Horned Owl, messenger of the God of Wisdom. It is said that it aids the possessor's thoughts with its wisdom, lighting a path through uncertainty. Its magical power's casting speed increase. Celestial Spirit Cloak. Cloak used exclusively by mages, woven upon a meteor's trajectory. A production class item crafted with phantasmal class materials, which are extremely rare. Its special ability is to absorb power from the position of celestial bodies to strengthen astral element spells. Millennium Bird's Crow. Talisman made of a piece of wood from the sacred tree Vendiria, which was scattered when the sacred bird was born. Containing the life of the immortal, the effects of movement speed hindrance status are reduced. A tree stump a few meters tall was there, just as he had guessed. He went around that stump and made a turn at the two-story building. It was right there where he remembered it. Green moss had spread throughout the land. The asphalt, once ubiquitous, appeared infrequently here and there. Shiroe dashed through the ruins. The buildings stood in close succession, coiled and sometimes pierced by giant ancient trees. He was running past scenery that he hadn't seen before, yet it still felt somewhat familiar to him. There were silhouettes of people curled up in the streets. These were likely adventurers in the same situation as Shiroe. Their moans and screams made Shiroe forcibly suppress the fear that gradually rose up in his throat. But he was barely putting up a show. What's happening? I'm strange. What is this? Someone get out here! Hey, Game Master! Are you listening? Their screams sounded like dying animals. Those excessively miserable screams brought back a tiny amount of composure in Shiroe. To not scream like that was the sole thought keeping him going. I can move my body as I like. It's uncomfortable because the size of my limb seems to be slightly different. Thankfully, not by much. What spread before his eyes was the city of Akiba. Many abandoned buildings were intertwined with ivy, reaching out vigorously from the asphalt here and there. The vines blended in with the ancient spirit-blessed trees. Nostalgia washed over him. This was the hometown of many players, the largest city of the Japanese server of Elder Tales. Akiba! Ridiculous! Have I gone nuts? Someone answer me! A man cowering nearby shouted. Everyone was dressed as a citizen of a Middle Ages fantasy world, wearing full-length clothing or even armor. That was normal. Elder Tales was the world's largest class of massive online games with a theme based on a world of swords and magic. But then, it was just a game. The wind brushing onto Shiroe's cheeks was cold, moist, and refreshing, like he was in the middle of a thick forest. The air was different from the dry and somewhat prickly air in Tokyo where Shiroe lived. The wind, twisted with the smell of greenery, told him that this place wasn't the world he was familiar with. Shiroe shook his head and thought back. He was playing Elder Tales. He remembered facing his desk at home and enjoying playing the game displayed on his LCD monitor. Elder Tales was actually a long-running title, boasting a 20-year history. Of course, its contents and game engine were replaced with the latest version by frequent software updates, but its abundance of data and deep game traditions accumulated from its long operation were what won the popularity of its users. Today should have been the day to commemorate the release of the 12th expansion pack of Elder Tales. The data he had downloaded beforehand would be lifted of its restricted status and would bring about new items, new zones, new monsters and battles, and above else, raise the level cap of the world of Elder Tales. Today was also the day the expansion pack was brought live, so there should be a great number of players connected to the game world. Shiroe didn't have a sound way of investigating that, but the fact that many of his friends were connected was confirmed from his friends list. Shiroe was a veteran player in Elder Tales. He started the game when he was in middle school, and had been playing it for 8 years. There were over 100,000 players in Japan alone. The number of fans worldwide exceeded 20 million. The massive online game had mesmerized Shiroe for a long time. He had, of course, been looking forward to this expansion pack, However, he felt awkward about frolicking about it like a newbie, so he decided to pass time as usual. He'd been practicing hunting at a beginner area, tutoring a pair of twins with some general advice and explaining the usage of items. But there his memory was abruptly cut. Shiroe remembered seeing some sort of demo, the words of shining flames in a black scene. The sky was filled with a sticky darkness like asphalt scrolling quickly, and a white moon that cut out that blackness. However, that was it. And now, Shiroe was running an Akiba as his own pair of legs that had turned real kicked off from the ground. And now, Shiroe was running an Akiba as his own pair of legs that had turned real kicked off the ground. A rhythmic sound like that of a xylophone being played rang in his ears. This familiar chime was an alert notifying him of an incoming telepathic call. Shiroe concentrated on his forehead in a way like he was squinting his eyes and selected a menu that appeared in his mind. After being sent flying to this game world and letting go of the panic he felt at first, Shiroe had quickly picked up on these controls. "You here yet, Shido? I'm almost there." Shiroe listened to the voice of his dear old friend as he made another right turn at an abandoned building on the verge of collapse. The clear sound of him cutting through the top of the trees and humid smell were carried by a gentle breeze. And then there was a dazzling light. The brightness was something one couldn't experience unless one witnessed it in early summer. Under the cool winds, instead of bringing heat, the sun rays simply burst with white radiance. A pure, overwhelmingly intensity of light. The city was illuminated by the light of early summer. The ancient giant trees and buildings cast deep black shadows on the main streets covered in black soil and asphalt. The contrast was beautiful. The scene that was spreading out before Shiroe's eyes was something he had seen countless times. The hometown of the game world, the city of Akiba. However, that scene had an overwhelming sense of realism that was impossible for a game, and it was enveloping Shiroe completely. Shiroe was sprinting in the scenery with his very own legs. Every step he took, he felt the slipperiness of wet moss crushed by his soul. He felt his heart strongly pumping his blood to every nook and cranny of his body, which was heating up from the exercise. This was something he couldn't doubt. This was reality. The city was, indeed as Shiroe remembered it, the city of Akiba. The crumbling ruins, the repeatedly extending barrack bars, and the old trees spreading their roots on the roads were all swallowed by a green forest even as they coexisted. This was the game setting of the holy ground of the ancients. This was Akiba. Within the League of Freedom towns east of the arcing archipelago Yamato, Akiba was the hometown of the players and the core city of the Japanese server in Elder Tales. He ran through the center of the street and made a turn at a corner of a 3-story inn and bar. The crumbling ruins were buildings made of concrete, Softech, Yashikayama Electronics, Kulta Tower, etc. Various buildings and famous places gave the impression of the real world's Akihabara, and they were reconstructed as ruins of an older era in Elder Tales. The legacies of the old era were sleeping here and there in this world. They could be giant underground ruins or towers that pierced the skies. The city of Akiba was a legacy itself. As if clinging on, the buildings made of logs were extending the giant concrete structures that were on the verge of becoming rubble, and all of that was embraced within the bosom of the ancient trees. The scenery was miraculous. After Shiroe arrived, Naotsugu, who was sitting on concrete debris, stood up and received him. The light shone in from holes without window frames in the wall, illuminating the two better than any game engine could have managed. Naotsugu looked pale, but he still laughed heartily and slapped his sheath. He was a bit more than 1.8 meters tall, wearing dull but remarkably strong steel armor over his sturdy body. Naotsugu had a shield on his back and looked like an ancient heroic warrior in his getup. "Hi, Shido." "Naotsugu, eh? Good morning." Shiroe didn't know how to react when he heard Naotsugu's greeting, and fell back on his plain, cold greeting. Elder Tales had a standard voice chat system. Players were able to communicate while playing the game by using speakers and a microphone, like chatting on the phone. Some players didn't like to use the voice chat system and insisted on text messages, but Shiroe and Naotsugu were not like that. That was why Shiroe remembered and was very familiar with Naotsugu's voice. Naotsugu Hasegawa. If anyone asked Shiroe who was the most reliable person in the game, he would be among the first few choices that came to mind. Online gaming referred to playing a game through the internet. Elder Tales was a massively multiplayer online, or massively multi-user online game. Several hundreds or thousands of players would be connected to the same game space to play this game. In other words, this type of game allowed players to know many other players, working or competing with each other. Shiroe had played Elder Tales for many years, so he knew quite a lot of people in the game. But the people you knew in the game remained in the game. Different people might have had different playing styles and opinions, but most people would not reveal their real identity in the game world. With the increase in online crimes after the year 2000, protecting your personal data was common sense for the online community. But that didn't mean you couldn't make real friends. Naotsugu knew Shiroe's real name, meaning Shiroe gave him his contact details and was one of the few players that had met him offline as well. Shiroe let out a sigh of relief when he heard Naotsugu's voice. They might have met in person before, but they had spent much more time conversing through the game screen. Naotsugu spent countless nights with Shiroe in Debauchery Tea Party, visiting countless border zones and experiencing countless battles together. He was one of the players in Elder Tales whom Shiroe was great friends with. They had chatted about so many things under the skies. They even discussed their boring feelings. Naotsugu was completely unlike a friend he had only met in a game. For Shiroe, this cheerful and reliable voice was the symbol of Naotsugu. "What's this situation? Did Elder Tales evolve to this level while I wasn't playing? To be honest, this is too real for me. This isn't possible with just improving the level of the particle effects and rendering machines, right? This a joke?" Naotsugu pouted as he asked Shiroe. His cheerful and chatty voice sounded a bit depressed. "This is nerve-wracking." Shiroe vaguely nodded and raised his magic staff in his hand. "Come on. This is a magic staff. Magic staff." This was a commonly seen item in fantasy games, and was just up to Shiroe's shoulder in height. It was made by grinding and bending a long, slender tree branch and reinforcing it with metal, just like a magic staff used by mages. The only place you could find this was in a role-playing store. Naotsugu probably noticed Shiroe's silent reproach. He bent his head back to check himself out. He was wearing steel armor that seemed to weigh dozens of kilograms, with a shield on his back and a sword with an elegant hilt on his waist. Naotsugu looked like a warrior in a fantasy setting. I look like a role player myself." That's right. Even though they were not the sounds of joy, the two of them looked at each other and laughed. "Now that you mention it, you look the same." "You too." The two of them observed each other's appearance. Shiroe and Naotsugu were basically game characters in Elder Tales. The characters in game were originally constructed using 3D models, a far cry from the real world. But the two of them existed for real in this world, in which everything was detailed as reality. But if you looked closely, this was not turning the game into reality. As a game, the characters of Elder Tales were designed for both males and females. Since it was a monthly subscription game, there were very few players who intentionally chose ugly appearances. To meet the demands of the players, the market would use beautiful 3D models. But Naotsugu was not just turning his stylish character in Elder Tales into reality. Shiroe had seen him in real life several times, and he looked exactly like Shiroe had remembered. "Naotsugu, your face looks very similar to your real face, doesn't it?" With the scar that ran through the brow of his game character gone, Naotsugu's face revealed his own bright eyes with slightly drooping corners. His adult face had a boyish grin on his lips. "You too, Shido, a scholarly man with glasses and wickedly beady eyes." There were friends who described Shiroe this way, and his features seemed to be reflected on this body. As Shiroe thought about this, he gave the standard answer he used countless times. Can you just ignore that? "What is the current situation? Tell me if you know anything, Blackheart Glasses." "I personally want to tell you, but I don't know anything." Shiroe and Naotsugu kicked away the shattered debris and sat down. Shiroe didn't have any information to explain the current situation. Compared to the suburban area Shiroe woke up in, this was much closer to the center of Akiba. If you listened carefully, you could hear the buzz of the city from here. "Firstly, this isn't a dream." "Yeah." Shiroe nodded and agreed to Naotsugu's inquiry. When he regained consciousness, he was in a familiar place that didn't exist in the real world, which seemed like the game he was playing. Elder Tales was a fantasy game with a world of sword and sorcery as its backdrop. Players could create their characters, adventurers, and travel through the world from their character's view. The body that Shiroe was controlling like his own was a character he controlled in the game, Shiroe. But the appearance of this character seemed to reflect the real face of Shiroe. Have you seen the status screen? I have. Since Elder Tales was a game, the strength, stamina, and all sorts of abilities were represented in the form of numbers. All sorts of commands in the game were input through the menu. There was no such game-related screens anywhere you looked in this world. If you focused on your forehead region, the world would present a translucent status screen displaying all sorts of values and graphs. By controlling the cursor with your mind, you could perform all sorts of actions. Both of them realized this about half an hour after waking up. They also discovered the telepathy function. This was a function used to contact your friends that were online in the game. In the Elder Tales world, this function was similar to a cell phone, allowing players to contact their friends from far away. However, they could only contact people registered on their friends list. Shiroe had been shocked, and he shouted when he discovered that Naotsugu was online. Naotsugu was surprised when Shiroe contacted him through telepathy, but he quickly agreed to meet up at the ruins nearby. The silence hung between them as both of them thought about what to say, but the answer was obvious. Shiroe had a better grasp of the situation than Naotsugu. From what Shiroe knew, Naotsugu hadn't logged into Elder Tales in the past 2 years. Shiroe told Naotsugu everything he knew. Everything wasn't much. If it were about things that happened during the 2 years when Naotsugu wasn't around, they could have talked all day. But Shiroe had no clue regarding the reason and background as to why they were involved in this perplexing event. What he could confirm was that he installed the expansion pack Novasphere Pioneers and was playing with the beginners just outside of the city when the incident happened. The place looked the same as the starting point of Elder Tales, Akiba, and they seemed to be in the game world. They had the same bodies as their characters and retained all the items and equipment they had in the game. Now that I think about it, how are the twins doing? I need to check up on them later. But Shiroe didn't know why this was happening. As Shiroe narrated, Naotsugu listened carefully. When unfamiliar terms popped up, he would ask about them, but he didn't interject with his own opinions. Shiroe didn't like noise. He was fine with lively and festive atmospheres, but he disliked chaotic hustle and bustle. Naotsugu was cheerful and mischievous, but he was smart enough to listen to others. Their characters differed, but they hit it off well. Maybe they both had the generosity to compromise with each other. I see, eh? An alternate world. An alternate world has sucked us in, and fantasy has become reality. So Naotsugu, why are you here? Making a comeback? Naotsugu replied, Yeah, I heard about the new expansion pack and all the things that were calming down, so I logged in to take a look. Come back. So Naotsugu was coming back. So Naotsugu was planning on coming back. He recalled that Naotsugu was 2 years his senior. Shiroe met Naotsugu 4 years ago. Shiroe was already a veteran player in Elder Tales then. It was normal for a middle school student to play with computers in that era, but Shiroe was one of the few homely types. Put simply, even if he went out, his heart was still at home. He was a kid who was lonely even in a crowd. Even after moving on to high school and college, he maintained this form of entertainment, touring the virtual world every day. Elder Tales already had a special place among online games back then. If you wanted to play a challenging game with incredible content, it had to be Elder Tales. This was the view of the game amongst the players. For instance, Elder Tales had a grand vision, the Half Gaia project. It might sound ridiculous, but the goal of the project was to recreate Earth at half its scale. The starting city for the Japanese server was Akiba, corresponding to Tokyo in the Japan archipelago. North American servers had the Big Apple and the South Angel as starting cities. Japanese and American servers were just convenient names to refer to. The online world was made up of many different servers connected to each other, so it was theoretically possible to head for other continents, or even the end of the world. Hence, one of the selling points of Elder Tales was the ability of players to travel to other servers, something normal MMOs could not emulate. The Half Gaia project was a long-term goal. The current game was not a perfect rendition of the real world. In Elder Tales, the world was divided into many zones, each with its own territory and boundaries. The vast sea of trees in Mount Fuji was a zone where ferocious monsters lurked. The dungeon Shinshuku Metro Complex was a stage for adventure, and the city of Akiba was a non-combat zone. Going deeper, a hotel was a small zone. Some zones could be traded. If you accumulated enough in-game coins, you could be a land or homeowner. All zones were connected in their own ways. Open plains, for example, didn't have boundary demarcations, so players weren't able to tell which zone they were actually in. When they moved across zones, they wouldn't even notice. Some zones had obvious demarcations, like some buildings and rooms, which were individual zones connected elsewhere through a door. From what Shiroe knew, the Japanese server managed tens of thousands of zones. With such a scale, the developing company had to outsource to other major gaming companies, and knowledgeable veteran players like Shiroe were convenient, reliable existences. Shiroe had been invited by many guilds during his long tenure in the game, and had joined a guild temporarily, thinking of it as a trial. Guilds were the most common way for players to form a group in Elder Tales. After entering a guild, players could access the guild account in the bank and use their guild warehouse to manage their equipment easily, as well as other convenient services. The guild members kept in touch with each other, so it was easy to form raid parties. So most players in Elder Tales joined a guild since it was convenient and had many benefits. Since Shiroe liked to research the game contents and even got news from foreign servers, his knowledge was better than that of other veteran players who played as long as he had. From this perspective, Shiroe was someone who could contribute greatly to whatever guild he chose to join. No player could grasp the details of all the zones perfectly. Shiroe was also not a genius of that level. But things like main routes, the connections between zones, or the transport devices known as fairy rings could shorten your transportation time greatly. What you could buy at which zone, or where you could hunt for a specific monster, this knowledge needed to be accumulated slowly over time. Countless zones, endless varieties of items and monsters, missions known as quests, all kinds of ancient lore and knowledge, and anything else the developers could think of. The culmination of all of these was Elder Tales. But Shiroe could not get used to relationships that included elements of convenience and benefit. He'd mellowed out now, but the Shiroe back then was much more stubborn and naive, and an embarrassing neat freak. Even if Shiroe didn't make many requests of others, he didn't know how to decline others. He didn't reject them, but his feelings didn't accept them either. There were all sorts of people in the game world. As long as there were people, there would be both pure and impure relationships. For the middle school Shiroe, this might have been too shocking. Shiroe noticed that he was being used like a walking encyclopedia. Along with his high-level character, he was dragged around like an all-purpose tool to fight for the convenience of others. Shiroe couldn't adjust to this type of relationship or reject it tactfully, so he chose to leave the guild and mingle with others in temporary raid parties by himself. Before Shiroe realized it, he had become a famous solo player with both deep knowledge and a high-level character. As his fame grew, he fell deeper into solitude. Naotsugu met him when Shiroe was starting to get stronger and travel alone, having given up on guilds. Shiroe was starting to grow numb to the feeling of solitude. Shiroe and Naotsugu met in the Debauchery Tea Party. The Debauchery Tea Party was not a guild. It was just the Debauchery Tea Party. There was no other way to describe it. It was just a group of players who just happened to congregate there. Even though they just happened to be there, they were always there and ready to go. That was the place Shiroe belonged to. The guilds they joined were different. Their characters were not the same. They had nothing in common. They just gathered in the ruined building, sometimes in the plains, other times on the hills where you could see the stars. This group went on adventures. Elder Tales was a sword and sorcery-style fantasy world, set thousands of years into the future. This was the setting the players bought into. According to the legend of Elder Tales, there had been a massive war on Earth, shattering the old world, which was miraculously reconstructed by the gods into this one. This was a common mythical setting seen in fantasy games. Common mythical monsters like orcs, goblins, trolls, giants, chimeras, and hydras roamed the lands. Most players found joy in battling, gaining experience and leveling up after defeating monsters, looting powerful and rare treasures. This was the common way to play Elder Tales. But this was just grinding and farming, not real adventuring. Fighting repeatedly and adventuring were different things. Shiroe discovered that for the first time in Debauchery Tea Party. And he would always see her in Debauchery Tea Party, as well as the companions who were helping her. Shiroe was also a companion there. The people Shiroe met in Debauchery Tea Party might be the first friends he met in Elder Tales. Naotsugu was one of them. To read along with Log Horizon, or to read any other fine light novels, go to Baka-Tsuki.org. Baka-Tsuki.org. If you want to voice a character for audio light novel Log Horizon, contact me at youtubecontact22@yahoo.com. If you want to pay for your services, I can pay some money, just not a lot, and I am willing to negotiate a price. You can also volunteer if you wish. Again, just contact me at the specified email address. I'm also willing to reply to any constructive criticism, so if you have any ideas for audio light novel Log Horizon, please leave them in the comments. If you like audio light novel Log Horizon, please leave a like or a comment, as it really does motivate me to do those.